Greetings to all my listeners out there. This is the 72nd episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit show. I'm your host, Mark Hasara, and for over 60 years, my passion has been everything aviation. I love flying. For 24 years, I was a KC-135 pilot in the United States Air Force and helped create the KC-135 Weapons School, now the 509th Weapons School at Fairchild Air Force Base. On the Lessons from the Cockpit show, we debrief some of the most intriguing and fascinating pilots, aircrew members, maintainers, and aviation enthusiasts from all over the world. We share their stories on our show, but more importantly, what did they learn from these extreme and extraordinary military, commercial, and even general aviation events? Our purpose is to show how does the aviation world work and increase critical thinking skills both in the air and on the ground. This show is sponsored by the book Tanker Pilot, Lessons from the Cockpit, found in all 4 formats on Amazon: hardback, softback, Kindle, and Audible. We're also sponsored by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. These are incredibly detailed vinyl prints that you can peel off and stick to any flat surface. They are so detailed that you can even read the stenciling behind the arming T-handles on the sidewinders. Go by wallpilot.com and look at the 137 ready-to-print profiles that are there, or contact us and let us do a custom one for you. We print them 4, 6, and 8 feet. If you haven't already, folks, go by my TikTok page, Lieutenant Colonel Mark Hasara. We are making a TikTok shop that's going to sell these, but they're also going to sell smaller versions, about 7 inches, that you can put on your walls, your water bottles, and on the back of your vehicles if you'd like. My TikTok page has gone kind of crazy. In 1 year, I've had 75 million views, and I have 153,000 followers with 5.6 million likes. That's the Lieutenant Colonel Mark Hasara TikTok page. On today's show, I'm going to report to you about the Airlift Tanker Association's 2023 convention that I went to last week, and General Mike Minahan, the commander of AMC's tremendous keynote speech. So, grab an adult beverage of your choice, sit down, strap in, and let's begin the Lessons from the Cockpit show. A couple of months ago, I got an email from somebody I had heard of but had never met, Major General Tom Kane. He asked me a question: would I be willing to be on the Airlift Tanker Association's brand new Heritage Committee? They were looking for a smart tanker guy to be on this committee. And an old boss of mine, Lieutenant General Bill Welser, said, if you're going to have a tanker guy, there's only one guy to go to, and that's Mark Hasara. He literally wrote the book on air refueling. And if you need a smart tanker guy and somebody that has a real passion for aviation and air refueling, then Mark Hasara is your man. So Tom Kane sent me an email and I accepted. I said, I'd love to be on this committee. One aspect of being on this committee is I may be coming to an Air Mobility Command base near you. They've asked me if I would be interested in traveling to some of the bases and talking to some of the airmen and the contractors and civilians. Of course, I'd love to do that. It'd be great to get out and meet a lot of you. So I'm just warning you, Sluggo may be coming to a base near you soon, and I hope to meet many of you if I do. And I'll announce where I'm coming and where I'm going on the show and let you know. Particularly, I would love to meet those of you who've read my book and be able to put a note in the book that you have. I don't just sign the books. I put a personalized note in every book that I sign. So hopefully I'll be able to see some of you soon. One of the great things about the Airlift Tanker Association Symposium and Convention is the industry floor. What do I mean by industry floor? All of the big major defense contractors come with these big booths showing off all of their stuff. And the really cool thing is they bring some really cool swag. I do not drink alcohol, but I got these 2 beautiful whiskey glasses from Boeing with the KC-46 on one side and their logo on the other. Boeing had in their booth their mock-up of the remote vision system station for the boom on the KC-46. And as many of you know, there's been a lot of press about the remote vision system 1.0 in the KC-46. Black and white, some really bad shadows, stuff dealing with glare, all of those kinds of things have been in the press. Well, thank you, Ernie Burns, former boom operator that I worked with, who now works for Boeing, who allowed me to sit in the chair and actually see the remote vision system 2.0. You put on these special glasses because it's all 3D, and I got to sit and just kind of watch the different videos that they have captured from recent exercises using the new cameras. And I am here to tell you folks, it was amazing. The first thing that came up to the boom was the RC-135. And now the RC-135 rivet joint has a lot of antennas on it because it is, of course, sucking in all the electrons around it, but it's also data linking all of its information off board. Well, I'm telling you, the remote vision system 2.0 had that thing in color, and you could even see the little small shadows of the little antennas. You could see the pilots in their chairs in the RC-135, even though that's behind a really deep shadow, and you could see them moving around and doing things. They had the C-17 come up to the boom, and that has been historically one of the airplanes that has caused problems with the boom system. But here's one of the things that was amazing. The C-17 was being refueled somewhere over California in one of the anchor areas. I'm not sure where, but I'm a detail guy. And I was looking at all the little small details that the remote vision system 2.0 was picking up. The big details it was picking up were fabulous. All the pitot tubes, all the angle of attack indicators, the windshield wipers, the pilots, everything. But here's what I noticed. Around the receptacle of the C-17, there are a series of lights that help the boom operator guide the nozzle into the receptacle. And this was a day refueling. Those lights actually are raised up a little bit off of the fuselage. And folks, this is how incredibly detailed this remote vision system 2.0 was. It even showed the small shadows of these raised air refueling direction lights on the receptacle of the C-17 during the daytime. The other thing I noticed was the detail behind the airplane on the ground. All the little small trees, the highways. They flew over an airport, and it had all the little details of the airport to include all the big airplanes, all the small airplanes. Why do I tell you this? I think this remote vision system problem that the KC-46 has had is solved. Now, I know that there are better cameras than the ones that they use in the 2.0 system. The folks in the Collins Aerospace booth told me that there were, and they're looking at those also. But I'm here to tell you, sitting in the boom operator's chair for the KC-46 and looking at the new remote vision system, I was amazed at the color, the detail, and even the really fine things that the remote vision system picked up. So we had RC-135, we had a C-17 over California, we had F-15s out over the ocean. They took the airplane to Kadena and did some of the tests out there with the F-15s. Of course, they did F-16s. Oh, they had the video of F-16s at night over the Edwards Range. And the pilot in the front, you could see the mask, all the details of the helmet, everything. But what was really cool was the gal who's the test director in the F-16 programs had on her night vision goggles, and you could even see all the little small details of her night vision goggles. And now I'm here to tell you, refueling at night a dark airplane like a F-16 is tough, but there is an infrared system associated with these new remote vision system cameras really make it bright and nice and really easy to refuel. And the F-16 is kind of a hard airplane to refuel because it's got kind of a small receptacle. So I was really excited, folks, to be in the Boeing booth and them to have this remote vision system. I don't know if it's a trainer or what, but I got to sit in it and see firsthand the solution to this issue they've had with the remote vision system. Ernie Burns told me that they're also going to have the capability of Link 16 and being able to have the tanker, the C-46, KC-46, on the network. And that network is going to be able to share information. They told me an anecdotal story about how the AWACS was late for takeoff during a red flag vulnerability period or VUL period recently. And because of the connectivity and data link system in the KC-46, they were able to use the KC-46's data link system to share all the information that was bouncing around between the RC-135, the E-8 Joint Stars, and all of the fighters. It fit right in. And I believe he told me too, there was the Wedgetail from Australia that was also there. They were able to network some of the weapons so that the weapons were talking to each other, the fighters were talking to each other, the bombers were talking to each other, the ISR platforms were talking to each other, the drone video and some of its stuff was being data linked to airplanes that needed to see certain things on the ground. It was amazing to hear all of the things that the KC-46 does. Now, there's been a lot written about this airplane, a lot of issues. And I think to me, it looks like they've got the remote vision system problems and issues knocked with this new RVS 2.0 system. There are even better cameras out there that they'll be able to put in the airplane. You got to remember too, a lot of the systems that were in the KC-46 are early 2000, maybe even late 1999 kind of things. And so it's going through some system refreshes that is allowing this airplane to really be both a connectivity type of airplane, an air refueling airplane, and of course it carries pallets of cargo, much like the KC-10 does. When you do a coronet, and coronets, what they are, folks, is movements of airplanes either to a region like an exercise or to the fight. And you have to put cargo on the airplane, you have to put passengers on the airplane, and the KC-46 is going to fill that role very well. I will tell you, I would not have retired the KC-10s just yet. But what I was told was the maintenance and the upkeep of the KC-10s is just getting too expensive. It's an 82, let's see, tail numbers were 1980 through 1983, if I remember right. That's a long time ago, okay, folks? And we've come a long way with systems that we can put on airplanes. So I'm worried about there being an air refueling gap, but I'm encouraged that the KC-46 is doing missions that tankers didn't used to do, like this connectivity piece. The remote vision system is getting the bugs worked out of it. The pilots who were there that fly the KC-46 absolutely love the airplane. So some good news about the KC-46. I've said to many people, Boeing will get the problems fixed. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of money. They'll get the program on its feet and it'll keep going and it'll be a great airplane, a fabulous airplane. And I think it's on the verge of that. Good on Boeing, good on the Air Force working together with Boeing and all of Boeing's industry partners in overcoming some pretty tough challenges because, like I said, I flew the Remote Vision System 1.0 and I was not impressed. I'll just tell you that right up front. Black and white system, shadows, shine off the airplane, all those kinds of things were very troublesome. And what I saw when I sat down in that chair, and thank you, Rich and Ernie Burns, for showing me the ins and out of this thing, I'm really encouraged. Now, one other great thing that happened on the air refueling front, there was a recent exercise in the Pacific called Commando Sling in Singapore. This is an annual exercise that they hold down there that the Americans always go to. This time, the F-16s from Osan, Korea, the 36th Fighter Squadron, the Fiends, were going to be participants. Well, something happened, and it was a first for the Air Force to get those F-16s down to Singapore on a Coronet. They used commercial air tankers to do it. Omega Air Tankers has ex-Dutch Air Force KDC-10s in their fleet now. They were able to put cargo and passengers on the KDC-10, fly it into the Singapore airport, Paya Lebar, and operate down there. This was the very first time that Air Force airplanes connected and did a Coronet behind a commercial tanker. And there's a lot of news articles that I'll link to in the show notes that you can read what happened. There's Air Force press releases. Obviously, Omega had press releases. There's a lot of really good pictures of this Omega KDC-10, ex-Dutch Air Force KDC-10, refueling the F-16s on the way down. I even saw a picture of it taking off out of Osan. And you got to remember, Osan's a short runway. It's a 9,000-foot runway. So we now have had commercial tankers refueling U.S. Air Force airplanes, dragging them to an exercise and then refueling them while they are participating in the exercise. The KDC-10 does not have a drogue system on it. It's boom only. And in previous episodes of this podcast, I told you about the headaches we had with the Dutch KDC-10s being boom only and only capable of refueling a handful of airplanes. Well, my good friend Tom Swiderick, who's the president of Omega, he and I flew together in the 909th Air Refueling Squadron at Kadena. I got to spend a lot of time with him, and he's going to be a future guest. He's going to talk about this when he comes on the show. Commercial air refueling is a viable option for getting airplanes to the theater, and it relieves pressure on the Air Force KC-46, KC-135 fleet for delivering airplanes to the theater. We can do it behind these commercial tanker companies. Now, Omega is one. There's also another one out of March Air Force Base. They are buying up the ex-Singapore KC-135s that have drogue pods and a boom, which is great. That's what you want in a tanker. 3 things you want in a tanker. It has to be air refuelable, it has to have drogues, and it has to have a boom system. These airplanes from Singapore are not air refuelable, but they're KC-135R models with a centerline boom and wingtip drogues. I'm hoping to get down to see these folks at Riverside and to spend some time with, I'm probably pronouncing the name wrong, Matria or Matera. I think it's Matera. And Rick and Joe and Donkey, all those great guys that I met at Tailhook, and to learn more about commercial air refueling. Commercial air refueling to help move airplanes, cargo, and passengers, that time has come. And I'm glad to see these companies doing well in the commercial air refueling world. I'm sure we'll see some other companies come out of this. I don't know. We'll see what happens. I don't know if the KC-10s that are in the boneyard are going to be up for commercial buy to some of these commercial units like Matria and Omega. We'll see. I'm encouraged to see these commercial tanker companies bellying up to the bar and taking some of the heat off of the Air Force tanker fleet. Omega has been refueling with the Navy and the Marine Corps for a long time. They've got 707s that have been doing that. The KC-135R models that the Singapore Air Force was flying, Matera's got those. Those are going to keep flying for a long time. And I'm sure they'll find other tanker platforms to put in their fleet. But I'm glad to see, once again, commercial air refueling coming of age. I mentioned to you earlier in this podcast, go to my Lieutenant Colonel Mark Hasara TikTok page. Walking into the industry floor, I had a very cool surprise at the Lockheed booth. Sitting down at the Lockheed booth, I watched this video that they were showing of an MC-130, this AFSOC Hercules, and a particular exercise that happened, I think it was last year. Now, folks, I want you to imagine this. If we were to go to war, say, in the South China Sea, with all of these Chinese bases on these man-made islands, imagine, if you will, C-17s and C-130s becoming strike aircraft. If you go to my Lieutenant Colonel Mark Hasara TikTok page, one of the things that I have pinned at the top got 1.2 million views for this post, and Lockheed was playing the video at ATA last week. Last year, during an exercise, an MC-130 was carrying palletized weapons. There is a new program that is called Rapid Dragon. The Rapid Dragon container holds 4 AGM-158 Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missiles, or JASSM. But they will also hold 4 long-range anti-ship missiles, or the LRASM version of the AGM-158. During this exercise off of Norway in what was, I think, called the Andøya Range, an MC-130 parachute extracted a Rapid Dragon pallet that had 4 of these JASSM cruise missiles on it. The pallet came out the back by parachute extraction. 3 big parachutes opened and kind of held it upright. And while it was descending, 4 AGM-158 JASSM or LRASM missiles dropped out of the container and hit 4 separate targets and smacked them, shacked them big time. And there is some video of this, of course, on YouTube. If you go to my Lieutenant Colonel Mark Hasara TikTok page, you can see the MC-130, the extraction of the box, the parachutes opening, and then the missiles falling out. C-17s, I understand, can carry, I think, 4 to 6 of these side by side. So you have 8 to 12 pallet weapons containers capable of being extracted out of the back of a C-17, and each container carries 4 precision-guided, low-observable, or stealthy AGM-158 Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile or long-range anti-ship missile. That's a tremendous capability for our airplanes in AMC to become strike aircraft and carry a lot of these things. You know, who knows how many you carry in a C5. I don't think they're dropping these out of C5s. The only thing that I have seen them drop out of so far is MC-130s and C-17s. We have an increase in our precision strike capability because we have palletized weapons. It was interesting. We had a weapons officer all call while I was attending. And being a KC-135 weapons officer, even though I'm retired, I got to attend. Lieutenant General Brian Smokey Robinson was there. And one of the questions he was asked was, hey, we're starting to carry these palletized weapons. Is there going to be some changes in the way we do things with these things in the back? And his answer was, those pallets that come out of the back of the airplane should be agnostic. It shouldn't matter. Your checklist should all be the same. Whether the pallet is carrying bundles of food or cargo or weapons, his vision is it shouldn't be any different. A lot of these weapons obviously have to be programmed and all those things have to go on. I don't know if they'll do it inside the C-17. As far as I know, is not a linked airplane. You know, that's something I'm going to have to look up. Here is another capability that Air Mobility Command may have in its future, and it has been tested and has been found very viable. General Robinson said it shouldn't matter what comes out of the back of the plane, if it's carrying weapons or if it's CDS bundles or, food, water, and ammunition for the troops on the ground. It should all be the same. Weaponized pallets going out the back is different, but I agree with him. It shouldn't matter what's being extracted out the back. So, folks, you're going to see in the near future a lot more tests. You're going to see this exercised a lot more with palletized weapons coming out of the back, MC-130s, C-130s, and C-17s. And these pallets are carrying 4 of these AGM-158 Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff missiles. And I think they have up to, the extended range versions have up to like almost 500-mile range. They have these little mini engines in them, and the wings fold out. And I think it carries like 1,000-pound warhead, and it carries different types of warheads. I went up to several of the people that were in the Lockheed booth, and I said, hey, I want to show you something. And I showed them my post, and then it had 1.2 million views almost a year ago. They were all pretty surprised. Spend some time and go look up some articles and just Google Rapid Dragon and watch some of the videos. The video of the MC-130 dropping over the Andoya Range is all over YouTube. And if I'm not mistaken, there are some videos of C-17s dropping them too. AMC airplanes are now carrying weapons. I understand that makes them targets, big targets. That puts them in harm's way. That means we have to dominate in the air. We have to kill all the SAM sites and kill all the MiGs. But you have a stealthy, low observable, 500-mile range cruise missile, the 1,000-pound warhead capable of coming out of the back of Air Mobility Command airplanes now. Another defense industry group that had a rather large booth on the floor was Gulfstream. I hope many of you know that the Gulfstream 550 are being made into military intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance platforms. The Israelis have been flying with a compass call / rivet joint / command and control Gulfstream for a long time. How many of you know that the United States Air Force just took delivery of its very first EC-37, which is going to replace the Compass Call? It has a lot of lumps, bumps, and warts on the aircraft. It is not streamlined very much like a Gulfstream executive jet. There's some really cool pictures on the web of the very first EC-37 being delivered down, I believe it's Davis-Monthan, where they have them all. When I say all, the EC-130 Compass Call airplanes. The EC-130 Compass Calls are decades old. Now we have all kinds of electronics that they couldn't have even dreamt of when the Compass Call was originally made. The EC-37, I don't know if it has a name yet. In the Gulfstream booth, they showed all the different versions. You know, there's a maritime surveillance version, there's the ISR version, there's the Compass Call version, and they showed all of these different versions of how they're making the Gulfstream 550 into this really extremely capable aircraft that fits in with the Compass Call mission and the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, or ISR mission. So it was fascinating to go into their booth and to hear a little bit more about what that airplane can do. Later on down the road, I'm going to do an episode, the ISR deck, as we call it, the reconnaissance deck, because I want all of you to understand what that intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance package does. And it does amazing things, from listening to jamming to putting the United States president on a TV in your living room or on the radio. There's some amazing things that Compass Call has been able to do with jamming comms, but also doing psychological operations. And when we do an integrated air defense system takedown, an IAD system takedown, Compass Call is critical to that. If you want to read some really fascinating articles about what the EC-37 is going to do, go back and look at the background articles on the September 2006 Israeli raid on the Syrian nuclear plant at Deir ez-Zor. It was called Operation Orchard, and then later on it got the name Operation Out of the Box, the name coming from the big box that they put over the top of this nuclear reactor, North Korean nuclear reactor, mind you, to hide it from prying eyes and satellites. And the mission that Israeli Special Forces did to confirm that that reactor was in fact a light water reactor, just like the one at Yongbyon, North Korea, how they got pictures from inside off of the Syrian nuclear director's computer while he was visiting Rome, and read how the, I believe I'm pronouncing this right, Sarat Maktal Special Forces of Israel went to this Deir ez-Zor nuclear reactor and took sand samples and dirt samples from around it that proved there was radioactive material in that area. It's an amazing story. And now you can even see the F-16I Sufa and F-15I Ram video of the airstrike. Really incredible story. But during that strike, Israel's Gulfstream ISR platform was part of the package. And if I remember right, Syria's air defense network went down for like 20 minutes while the F-16s, F-15Is were bombing the reactor and then coming out and recovering back in Israel from the strike. Really an amazing story. And Aviation Week and Space Technology actually did a whole series on it and kind of let the cat out of the bag where they shouldn't have, of how we take down integrated air defenses, the senior suitor system, how we do network attack, and how we can actually hijack surface-to-air missile radars. It's an amazing thing. Israel's Gulfstream ISR aircraft were a big part of this, and now our Air Force is receiving the same type of airplane with similar systems, probably upgraded since we're talking 2006. Much, much greater capability for the EC-37 to do its job. My weapons school commander, Bobby, works for Collins Aviation. Used to be called Rockwell Collins when I was working for them. They got bought out by United Technologies, who got bought out by Raytheon. And now Collins Aerospace is into a lot of things. We used to do aviation electronics, and Rockwell Collins did electronics and avionics. And the cockpits that we created are fabulous, folks. I mean, they're really good. Rockwell's technology, and I've had a lot of customers tell us, is just top of the mark, the best that they've ever seen. There was when the Fusion cockpit was going into the KC-46, Boeing was trying to make the cockpit up and didn't do so well. We took the 787 cockpit, when the 787 was being configured with its new avionics for its cockpit, Boeing was creating it. And they were way behind and way over budget. My good friend Bruce at Rockwell Collins went to him and said, look, you guys make a new cockpit like every 2 to 3 years. We make a new cockpit like every 8 months. Let us figure this out. They created what's called a SIL, a Systems Integration Lab, where you put all the parts in it and figure out where all the bugs are, and you just keep running it like it's a laboratory. You can run it 24 hours. And it worked. So they took the 787 cockpit out of the SIL in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and put it in the 787 simulator, and it worked the very first time. The Boeing engineers were like doing cartwheels and handstands down the hallways because, again, Rockwell has some wicked smart engineers in their cockpit and electronics divisions that can create these fabulous cockpits. One other cockpit that we do, all of the 160th SOAR cockpits for their Little Birds, their Blackhawks, and their Chinooks are all made by Rockwell or Collins Aerospace now. That was a big deal because we created this thing called the Common Avionics Architecture System, or CAS system. And all of these 3 helicopter versions had the same displays and avionics in their cockpits. It made it real easy to maintain them. We had field service engineers because their requirement was, Our cockpits in our helicopters have to work 100% of the time. Not 90% of the time, not 95% of the time, but 100% of the time. So when I was working at Rockwell Collins, I really learned the engineering piece about, what's in a display box. You have a cockpit display, but like what's behind it? What are all the different cards and the GUI, what's the GUI? I really learned what all of the different guts and cards are in these displays. You have the video card and you have the brain card. You had all these different things in there, stuff I didn't know. So it was a real education for me being at Rockwell Collins. Well, in the Rockwell booth, they, of course, had some of their best avionics that they are going into cockpits right now. And those cockpits are freaking amazing. We have the heads-up guidance system, which is like a heads-up display for airline pilots that can use an infrared camera to see down through the muck, and from a good 7, 8, maybe even 10 miles out, you can actually see the runway through the clouds. And that picture is put up on this heads-up guidance system piece of glass in front of you. And it has all of the alphanumerics, airspeed, altitude, descent rate, heading, all of those things right there in front of you, in front of your eyeballs. Really great system. The displays have gotten better. Now they have, 6x8 displays all the way up to a display that goes clear across the cockpit, one single piece of glass, which is all interactive. Rockwell's Collins radios are just phenomenal, as well as their Dagger, which is the GPS that the Army guys use. I mean, they really make some really, really fascinating stuff. Bobby showed me this chart that showed all of the integrated pieces of an air campaign, basically talking to people on the ground, people on ships, people in the air, and how they're all networked. And Collins TTNT technology is perfect for that kind of stuff. There's an anecdotal story too about TTNT. It's like a data link system. And we used it in JPALS, the Joint Precision Approach Landing System that is now in the F-35. Well, the Navy told us something very fascinating, that we needed to put slop in it because the hook point of the F-35 was hitting the carrier deck in the same 4 to 6 inches and was taking off the anti-skid coating that's on the carrier deck because it kept hitting in the same spot. So they put a little slop in it so it hit, I guess, 10 inches instead of 4 to 6. But that's how good these Collins products are. And it was just fun to sit there and look at all the products and the things that they're doing, particularly now that they're part of Raytheon, a much bigger company. They even do ejection seats. They do everything now, which is something Rockwell didn't do when I was there, that Collins Aerospace does now. And I think they're even getting into engines too. So it was fun to visit with Bobby and see all the new things that they're working on. And there was another gentleman there, Rusty. He's a retired Lieutenant General. Rusty Finley was there, and he was the director of mobility forces when I first showed up after 9/11 in the Combined Aerospace Operations Center at Prince Sultan. He was what we call the director of mobility forces, or the DERMOB 4. And so I got to meet him there, and it was fun just to see all of these people. But Rockwell just does amazing things, particularly when it comes to cockpit avionics and their ability to network things, network multiple groups of aircraft, multiple categories of ships, guys and gals on the ground in their vehicles. they're just really a leading edge technology company. And it was fun to just sit down and see all of the things that they're working on in a company that I worked for from 2007 till 2014. Rolls-Royce of England had a great booth too. Engine technology is something that I do not know a lot about, but visiting the Rolls-Royce booth, they had a lot of literature and a lot of demo things of engine technology. And man, has engine technology changed, even from the KC-135 CFM56 on the R models. The blade technology and the turbine technology are just incredible. How the computer systems run all of the different functions, fuel, air, everything to make the engine so efficient, but yet put out like 72,000 pounds of thrust. Another gentleman that I knew while I was on active duty worked in the Rolls-Royce booth, and it was great to see him, Dave Kasberg. He and I worked in the tactics directorate at AMC, and it was, again, fun to see him, but it was amazing to see all of the engine technology that is going into jet engines now to make them more fuel efficient and more miles per gallon of gas burned. The great thing about KC-135R model was when we changed engines from the old J57s, which burned a lot of gas, 1950s technology, to the KC-135R model CFM56 engines by Snecma and GE. That engine change allowed the KC-135 to increase its range by 40% and increase its offload capability by 50%. And I never had a problem with a R model engine except for one time. Oil seal broke and we pumped all of the oil out of that engine, but we were still an hour away from where we were going to land. So the engine, we shut it down and it was just windmilling out there with all the oil out of it, but it didn't do any damage to it. We got it on the ground. Of course, they had to bore scope it to make sure there wasn't any internal problems with it, because then they'd have to do an engine change, and we're at Misawa, which doesn't facilitate engine changes on KC-135s. But those CFM56 engines, I think there's been like 40,000 of them sold. I mean, they're on all kinds of airliners. The CFM56, a dynamic change in the offload and range capability of the KC-135. The amount of gas that we saved because that engine was on it was phenomenal. Now we have even newer technology from Rolls-Royce, from GE, that produce more thrust with less gas, taking airplanes longer miles. Any of you that have been on a flight from LA to Dubai know exactly what I'm talking about. That technology is truly, truly amazing. And it was great to see this engine turned. It was a see-through engine, and you could see all the working parts of it that was in this booth. Just really fun to see the engine technology and changes that are now powering Air Force airplanes. At the C5, it got new engines. The B-52, Rolls-Royce won the contract to re-engine the B-52. So we're going to see some even greater things engine technology-wise here in the near future as they take these old engines off of the B-52 and put these very fuel-efficient engines on the buff, allowing it to carry more and fly farther. Okay, the last thing I want to do here is get into General Mike Minahan's speech, and it was fantastic. He is a really charismatic leader. I've met him several times, and as I've mentioned, my book is on his Leadership Library reading list. And I had a couple of opportunities to interact with him while I was there at the ATA conference in Gaylord. And each time it was just great to see a four-star general that people really love and enjoy being around. And he even one night was singing Jimmy Buffett, Wasting Away in Margaritaville with General Paul Selva and my good friend and former squadron commander Gino Redman on the stage. He started his speech in kind of a peculiar way. I should not be here. That's what he got up and said. I shouldn't be here. He went and talked about, we are in a very different environment around the world right now with a lot of things going on. And he put up this slide, and on it, it had 34 days in crisis in the Middle East. We've had 24/7 mobilization. Crews are in Bravo Alert 24/7 now. Bravo Alert meaning you get a phone call and you're told, okay, you're going to get alerted to go fly during this time period. He said they've even had to cancel leave, and post-mission crew rest in many cases has been waived. And during all of this time, President of the United States, Vice President of the United States have made VIP visits around the world. He talked about how we are at war, and he made no bones about this. We are at war. Air Mobility Command has been at war for about a year and a half, according to what he was talking about. And it's a very different type of warfare. And I want to talk about that for just a moment. In, I think it was 1999, 2 Chinese Air Force colonels published a paper that was called Unrestricted Warfare. And it was basically, how do you bring the United States down? We cannot fight the United States conventionally. We have to do it by unrestricted warfare, meaning there are no rules. You fight the Americans in ways that warfare has never been fought before. Civilians are now targets. And this new strategy is right before us. All you have to do is look at the news and you can see this is going on right now. The Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Joanne Bass, talked about this in her keynote speech, where it's the culture of humiliation of the United States, the 100 years of humiliation of the United States. By 2049, China wants to be the dominant power in the world. Let me say that again. 2049, the Chinese want to be the most dominant power on the face of the planet. And they're going to do it by humiliating the United States and using these 15 modalities of war, as I call it. What was it called? The Belt Road Initiative, where they're going out and they're building bridges and hospitals and schools and all these different places, particularly in Africa. When you go to Djibouti, they have a huge military base in Djibouti, and they look at Africa as being one of their satellites. So there's a lot that the Chinese are doing just to humiliate the United States. And as you see in the news, folks, and I'm not going to go into the politics and the news of all of this, you know that China is in the news a lot right now. You can't listen to a news report without hearing something about what China is doing to influence political leaders all over the world. Here are the 15 modalities of war that come out of this white paper written by these 2 Chinese Air Force colonels. And this was written in 1999. And those modalities of war are cultural warfare, economic warfare, environmental warfare, financial warfare, illegal drugs, international law, information and the media. Go look at what the Chinese own where the media is concerned. Telecommunications and networks, 5G, think about that. Political warfare, psychological warfare, resource warfare, smuggling. Look at what's going on our southern border right now, particularly where human trafficking is concerned. Technology warfare, terrorists. What's going on in Israel between Hamas and Hezbollah? And last, the 15th, is gangs and gang warfare. Those are the 15 modalities of war in this unrestricted warfare white paper that they postulated. This is how we're going to bring down the United States. We cannot fight them conventionally. We cannot go with them toe-to-toe with military forces. We have to find better ways to do it. And here's the 15 ways that they're going to do it. So the first slide that he had up there was, here is the problem statement. And this is a really bold problem statement that he put up on this slide. The joint force is not ready, integrated, or agile to fight inside the first island chain. The first island chain meaning the Chinese island in the South China Sea. Those islands have runways. If you go to Google Earth and you do like a history of these islands, you can go back and see there are Su-27 flankers on some of these bases. On, what is it called, frigate shoals? The runways can handle their Badger bombers. Our operations stand on a three-legged stool, and I want you all to remember this three-legged stool. Joint integrated fires, persistent intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and continuous humanitarian operations. All of our military operations hinge on one of those three legs of this stool that our operations sit on. So going on, he says, we are not ready to move out and integrate as a force. Now, you would think after all of this time fighting in the Middle East and Afghanistan and Iraq, we'd be integrated. But according to General Minahan, not quite so. He said this is really true where it comes to working with our allies. And we need to be more interoperable with our allies because remember, our allies in the Pacific and Europe, in the Middle East, they're the real experts on what's going on in their neighborhoods. The Japanese, the South Koreans, the Filipinos in Europe, the French, the Germans, Italians in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates. We tend to kind of be the big bully on the block when we move in. And I learned when I was at the Joint Forces Staff College, we need to listen more to the folks that are living in the area that we are coming into when it comes to joint integrated fires, persistent ISR, and continuous humanitarian operations. We're not integrated amongst the services and with our allies. We cannot move fast enough to get to the fight is one of the big problems. So when he says the joint force is not ready, integrated, or agile to fight inside the first island chain, then what are we going to do to become that? Because remember, in his memo, he said back in March, he felt that in the next couple of years, we will be at war, and he was hoping we weren't, but we would be at war with the Chinese in the Far East, that island chain. There is $2 trillion worth of commerce that goes through the South China Sea. And with China having these bases on these man-made islands, they can bottle that up literally overnight if they wanted to. Surface traffic, such as ships carrying cargo, oil, whatever, or airline and cargo traffic going through the South China Sea. They could literally bottle that up and just block it off. Straits of Malacca, same thing. And think about that, $2 to $4 trillion, I think is what I read, of commerce going through that area annually. General Mike Minahan and some of the leaders of the Indo-Pacific and EUCOM said, let's find out. Let's find out how good we are and where the holes are and where we need to fill some of the capability gaps. This is why they did an exercise back in October and November of 2022 that they called Mobility Guardian 23. And it was freaking huge. And I'm going to talk about how big that was here in just a second. General Minahan, as part of this exercise, and he mentioned this while he was on stage, I did not give you time to deploy. I did not give you time to transition to employment. I did not let you take some of the stuff that you needed to operate. And I did this for a reason. It was to put stress on the system. By putting stress on the system, you find out here's where the holes are. Here's the capability gaps. Part of this kind of goes back to a memo that was put out by the Air Force Secretary Kendall, where he said the Department of the Air Force is not postured for great power competition in this memo he put out, meaning we are not postured in the Air Force to go against a peer threat, peer by meaning P-E-E-R, like China. These leaders wanted to find out. The Indo-Pacific Command leader, Admiral Aquilino, and General Minahan, and the EUCOM commanders, let's find out where the holes are. In this Mobility Guardian 23 exercise that went on for this month, the Mobility Air Forces, which I call the MAF, and you will hear me refer to the MAF numerous times here, the MAF weapons officers were brilliant in their execution and planning of Mobility Guardian. He says, I can't say enough good things about the airlift and tanker weapons officers and the things that they came up with. Really innovative solutions to some really complex problems that these weapons officers were able to create to overcome some of these problems of we don't have enough time to deploy, we don't have enough time to transition to employment, and we didn't bring some of the things that we would normally bring to war, and we got to figure out how to operate. He said the weapons officers came with new and very innovative ways of dealing with those problems. And folks, that was what the KC-135 Weapons School was all about. Build, teach, lead, and give you the tools and the knowledge to create very innovative ways of dealing with really complex problems, particularly when you're dealing with a coalition and your allies, and be able to integrate and operate your forces together on a battlefield. So he started with some of the low points first, and he put up some memes. And he goes, I'm sure some of you had some memes about me out there, but the first one he had up, I have 8 bosses. One of the problems was the command relationship issue. Our forces would show up at places like Tinian or Guam, and the command relationships weren't fleshed out. And we've seen this before. This is a lesson learned from Operation Anaconda. We did not create the right command and control structure in Operation Anaconda, and now we're seeing this again. This is one of those issues we see over and over again, particularly when you're dealing with the allies, because there may be times when we show up, particularly for the mobility air forces, to a region where our boss may be a Frenchman or a Japanese admiral. And so those clear command and control lines need to be created, and those relationships need to be fostered before you have to go into a region and figure out joint integrated fires, persistent ISR, and continuous humanitarian operations. The other thing he said about this particular lesson learned is within the first 3 days, this command relationship, this problem showed up of a month-long Mobility Guardian exercise. And folks, this is always a tough thing to do. Okay, who am I working for? And who's my boss working for? And that's something that's got to be done. And those relationships have to be developed before you show up at the scene of the accident. And the second one was, of course, command and control of an integrated force with our allies, once again, proved to be an issue, proved to be a problem. The command and control piece can make or break an operation. And we learned that from Operation Anaconda. And that was, again, another problem that we saw in Mobility Guardian. The third one he had was kind of interesting, where he talked about exploding into a theater or theaters. How do we explode? In other words, we use principles of war, mass, and economy of force to literally overwhelm a region in the first 24 to 48 hours. How do we get there so fast that it throws our adversary off his game plan, off guard? There's a number of ways to do that, both kinetically and non-kinetically, and that's one of the things that they found out while they were deployed and employing during Mobility Guardian. General Minahan then talked about, here's some of the good points, and he had a triple game changer is what he called it, and he had it on one slide. The first one was max endurance operation. And going back to the principles of war, mass, maneuver, timing, and tempo are what wins wars. When you talk about maximum endurance operations, he spoke of crews operating for 30 and sometimes even 40 hours. During this exercise, tankers were flying up to, I think it was 30 hours. And one of the things that allowed us to do that was, again, a weapons officer that went through the KC-135 weapons school. His paper was on hot pit refueling a KC-135, leaving one engine on so that you had power on the airplane and filling up the airplane while an engine was running, just like the fighter guys do. The fighter guys do hot pit refueling, where they come back from a mission, they go into arm, de-arm, switch the weapons from on to off, and head to the fuel pits. And these fuel folks come out there with these big long hoses, hook them up inside the wheel wells or the refueling points and fill them up. Well, guess what? KC-135s are doing that now. I would have never thought of that during my career. And yet we had a weapons officer who actually made a paper on that. And now we're doing that. The KC-135 fleet, the Airlift fleet are doing hot pit refueling with an engine running and filling the jets back up within minutes, 45 minutes. It'll take to fill back up a KC-135. I've seen it happen. A good fuel crew during Desert Storm could put water for the A model engines and fuel, 165 fuel loads, in about 45 minutes. And now we have codified that and have a checklist to do that kind of hot pit refueling, just like the fighter guys do. General Minahan, in his memo back in February, March, he emphasized lethality matters most. How can we make the mobility air forces more lethal? Lethality matters most. And he called it palletized effects. This is why I mentioned Lockheed Martin and the film that they were running with the Rapid Dragon palletized joint air-to-surface standoff missiles, 4 to a box, coming out of the back of a C-130. And the C-17s and the C-130s all being able to drop these palletized weapons out the back and become strikers. Think about that for a moment. We had a train of 17 C-17s that made the airdrop into Bashur. C-17s, C-130s have historically done air, land, and airdrop missions, and now they have a capability of becoming a striker, part of the combat air forces, dropping low observable, long-range cruise missiles out the back of their airplanes. And when you look at principles of war, I thought of maneuver and, of course, simplicity. It's a simple solution to put these things on a pallet in a box of 4, and it increases our ability to be a maneuvering force. It really does. And then the third thing he mentioned, the third of the triple game changers he said, was maneuver battle management. And this gets back to unity of command and economy of force, talking about the principles of war. Once you get the command pieces all figured out and you integrate all of your joint integrated fires with your allies and the capabilities that they have to put warheads on foreheads, put all of our intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets together, both ours and our allies, and all of our humanitarian capabilities together, you're unbeatable. And Mobility Guardian 23 showed that we had some gaps in this area, but we were able to overcome them and get some really, really good lessons learned out of this. Now, he talked about in the maneuver space some things that the Mobility Air Forces needs. And here's what those are. The Mobility Air Forces must have the same connectivity as the Combat Air Forces and ISR folks. We need to be able to have a mobility force that is on the same networks. Link 16, gathering all of the information and disseminating it from all the ISR assets to include drone video, streaming video. We need to be able to have the Mobility Air Forces, the MAF, in that same network. I had a long talk with some of the KC-46 folks and again, the Collins Aerospace folks too. The KC-46 with its network capability will be huge in this connectivity piece. All of the Mobility Air Force, C-17, C-5, C-130s, all of the airlifters need to have the capability of having on a screen, where are the bad guys? Where is the Red Air Force? Where are the Red SAMs? Where are the forces on the ground? And they're working on that with a piece called Real-Time Information in the Cockpit Technology. They're testing it here on KC-135s at the Utah Guard. Collins Aerospace, again, doing that. My good friend Bobby right in the middle of it. But if Mobility Air Forces is going to be carrying palletized weapons, then we need to be able to fit into that scheme of maneuver where the airlifters become strikers, be told, okay, here's your targets, here's their locations, given the mensured coordinates to drop a pallet of JASMs out the back that are going to strike 4 targets, whatever they might be, and integrate and be connected with the combat air forces, the F-15Es, the F-22s, the F-35s, and be an integrated force. Remember what I said, joint integrated fires. And the Mobility Air Forces can now be part of that because we have palletized weapons and palletized effects that we can use in the Joint Integrated Fires piece and the Persistent Intelligence, Surveillance, Reconnaissance piece. Next item that General Minahan brought up, we need to be a force that grows in disorder. We need to be able to get stronger and stronger as chaos builds and builds. And this all gets back to John Boyd and the OODA loop, the observation, orientation, decision, action loop. We need to explode into a theater in 48 hours with kinetic and non-kinetic effects that are command and controlled in a moment and on a network that everybody knows what everybody else is doing so that we can overcome this chaos and disorder on the battlefields. And he went on to say, we can thrive in that chaos. And Mobility Guardian 23 showed that we can, in fact, get stronger and build a force that is fighting increasing disorder and chaos. We did it. We did it. We showed that we could do it. Third thing he says, we need to help establish the kill chain, and the mobility air forces can be an integral part of the find, fix, track, target, engage, assess, kill chain that the combat air forces live by. We can be part of that same kill chain now if we are networked and if we are carrying palletized effects like the JASM and a whole host of other types of weapons that can be rolled out of the back of our airlift airplanes. The last thing he showed were some of the great notables of what happened during Mobility Guardian 2023. And let me talk about those for just a minute. Air Operations Center managed 2,168 missions in 1 month. There was 569 tanker missions, some of them lasting longer than 30 hours during Mobility Guardian. Mobility Guardian had 3,000 airmen and 60 airplanes operating during that month. The battlefield, get this is incredible. The battlefield or playground that Mobility Guardian took place in covered 32 million square miles. The Pacific, the US, and Europe. Long duration sorties, max endurance operations. Some days, these airmen were operating for up to 40 hours. He is a leader that leads from the front, and he got involved in some of these missions. And I think he was involved in one of these like 35-hour operational missions. Imagine that, a 4-star general flying your airplane. But he was involved in one of these long endurance missions. And it was funny too, because he said, this is truly a young man's game. And it really is, okay? It is a young person's game, because 30 hours is a long time. Worked for 36 hours at the KAOC in Prince Sultan and the run-up to Operation Iraqi Freedom in shock and awe. I was pretty wide awake during that whole time because you're so full of adrenaline in doing your mission and watching what's going on and staying in the game, because you really do have to have this warrior mindset that he is really trying to foster. Janelle McCauley is a doctor, former Air Force pilot, who is helping the Mobility Air Force become more warrior fighter focused. And she's doing a great job of it. If you haven't listened to some of her speeches, you can go on YouTube and listen to some of Janelle McCauley's really, really good speeches on this kind of stuff, on the warrior mindset. This was the first time Rapid Dragon was employed, palletized weapons. And I've already talked about how we had special fueling operations, hot pit refueling, that kept everything going. Let me just give you a quick historical note about that. The reason the Israelis were able to overwhelm the Arab air forces in the 1967 war is because they were doing 9 to 10 minute integrated combat turns. They were refueling and rearming their airplanes in 10 minutes or less. It means that you are doubling the amount of sorties you can fly during combat. The combat air forces, the fighter guys, do this integrated combat turn thing all the time. We've done it a little bit in the airlift world. You know, I'm not real familiar with that. Those of you who are airlifters know what I'm talking about. We've not done it in the tanker world, but we are now because this weapons officer wrote this terrific paper on doing hot pit refueling. You are economizing your force because you are using the airplanes for what they were designed to do. And you are employing mass, maneuver, and offensive principles of war by doing so. You're basically doubling your ability to fly missions. One other aspect of Mobility Guardian was a joint combined search and rescue exercise. The French, the Canadians, and the US had a search and rescue exercise. And I think this is the first time it's ever been done. One of the Air Force lessons learned folks, good friend Gramps, talked to me about how the aeromedical evacuation piece, they had a Humvee overturn and one of the gentlemen driving in the Humvee had a pretty serious leg injury, and it really overtaxed the ability to get him back to the States so that he could get fixed. And that's one of the pieces that they're working on. Because if we have World War II Pacific type of casualties, then that system has to be able to work and it has to function. Gramps told me that predominantly the aeromedical folks are all guard and reservists that will be deployed, meaning medical folks back here in the States that are deployed forward, who's going to work on them when they get back to the States? And one of the things that they learned was once they get to the States, how are we going to move them to the hospitals that they need to move to when they show up at Travis or other places? And that was one of the lessons learned that came out of this. We have to figure out the aeromedical piece and do some fixing to that. So that was General Minahan's speech. I have a link to it below in the show notes. Please, folks, take the time. It's 41 minutes long, and go listen to General Mike Minahan's Airlift Tanker Association 2023 keynote speech, because it is really good. On the Airlift Tanker Association website at atalink.org, the slides that he had will be up. I took pictures of them in my phone. And pretty soon, his keynote speech will probably be there too. But the Defense Visual Information Distribution Service, DVIDS, has that speech on its website. I would also recommend to you listen to Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Joanne Bass, and her keynote. She gave kind of an ops intel brief on China and some of the issues that they're having with recruiting, which was really good too. One of the last things General Minahan had in his briefing slides was a countdown clock, and it had 233 days on it. He is retiring on the 30th of June next year. There are a number of 3-star general officers, 4-star general officers that are very capable of moving into his position. My good friend Randall Reed, and of course Brian Smokey Robinson, who's the AETC commander, very capable general officers that can move into the AMC commander's chair. But General Minahan said he's retiring 30th of June next year, and he's trying to get all of this stuff done before he leaves in the summer of next year. My hat's off to General Minahan, a great leader, a very charismatic speaker, got the audience pumped up during his leadership. Air Mobility Command and the Mobility Air Forces has made huge strides in becoming a more integrated force, a more lethal force, a more connected force, and a force that can easily operate with our allies in any region on the world. Minnie, you have been a terrific commander, and you have led the Mobility Air Forces into new areas and arenas my generation couldn't have dreamt about. And it's because of your leadership, your charisma, and your vision for how the Mobility Air Forces can become a more joint integrated fires, a more persistent intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and a more continuous humanitarian operational force. And I salute you, brother. And as you always say, let's go. To all my listeners out there, if you ever get the opportunity to attend either the Air Force Association's Air and Space Symposium or Air Mobility Command's Airlift Tanker Association conventions, please go. Yeah, it's a little expensive, okay? A little over $500 to attend, but I believe they have tickets that you can go at least look at the industry floor, and that's incredible just by itself. But to hear all of these leaders get up and talk, there were other general officers that spoke. General Sullivan from Transcom, AFSOC commander came and spoke. I talked to you about Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Joanne Bass, came and spoke. There was some really incredible talks during this time period. Lieutenant General Brian Smokey Robinson, the AETC commander, also gave a great keynote speech. Please, all of you, take an opportunity and spend a little money to come to one of these things and hear your Air Force leaders, Transcom leaders, talk about what the Mobility Air Force is doing and how we're recruiting, training, and equipping these young Gen Z people to become warfighters. It really, truly is amazing. Thanks for listening to the 72nd episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit show. It's been great to be back. I realize I was off for a month, and I was really busy attending Tailhook, and then ATA got really busy because I'm on the Heritage Committee now. But you can expect to have a Lessons from the Cockpit show episode every 2 weeks a month from now on. I'm working on some great stickers. Those stickers that we made of the KC-10 and C-17 were a huge hit. They're 7-inch stickers that you'll be able to buy off of TikTok and off my website that go on water bottles, cars, windows, whatever. The Lessons from the Cockpit show is supported financially by the book Tanker Pilot Lessons from the Cockpit, found in all 4 formats on Amazon: hardback, softback, Kindle, and Audible. The softback version has the pictures in black and white. If you get the Kindle and Audible versions, there is a second file that downloads that has all the pictures in it. Please go by wallpilot.com and order 1 or 2 of our 138 ready-to-print aircraft profiles that are extremely detailed and very exhaustively researched, that you can put on the walls of your home, office, or hangar. They just peel off and stick right to it. A lot of people just frame them also. If you want a custom order done, and I'm doing 5 of them right now, we can even do the aircraft and unit patches too, to include weapon school, Top Gun patches, all kinds of things. Also, I want you to go by and visit the Lieutenant Colonel Mark Hasara TikTok page. I can't believe how that's exploded. 75 million views and 153,000 followers. And there's going to be a TikTok shop here pretty soon where you can also order these 7-inch stickers of all of these really famous airplanes. I've got, I think, 150 profiles just in one folder I recently downloaded that I'm working on. Everything from B-25s, ME-109s, all the way up to F-35s, F-22s, and even foreign fighters, Chinese fighters like their mighty Dragon J-20. This and previous episodes of the Lessons from the Cockpit show can be found on my website at markhasara.com. We are in the middle of creating a Lessons from the Cockpit show website that is separate from my own website, and that will be up probably within the next month, where all of my episodes can be found there. You can order my book and order all of these stickers, as well as link to Wall Pilot. Thanks again, folks, for listening in. I really appreciate all of you that are my listeners out there, particularly those that are hardcore listeners that download this as soon as it comes out. I apologize again. It's been 4 weeks since I put a show out, but I've been really, really busy with Tailhook and getting ready for ATA. Folks, have a great weekend and look forward to talking to you again on the Lessons from the Cockpit show.